Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. I'm here today with conservative royalty in Santa Barbara County, Andy Caldwell, who we all have known for decades as being a conservative voice in the community and somebody who has held the Board of Supervisors and elected officials accountable over the years. And so we're going to dive right in and talk about the latest sort of controversy at the Board of Supervisors. But first, let me welcome Andy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I've admired your work for many, many years.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it, and I see what you do, and you make the Board of Supervisors, better, and have to think through a lot of these issues in ways they wouldn't otherwise. Which brings us to this salary increase. Okay, so on the administrative agenda recently, they set a hearing date to increase their salaries by something like 49%. $58,000 increase. You spoke at that meeting. You brought it to everyone's attention. I wrote a story about it, and now they're going to talk about it next week on a day with Sable and this long agenda. But Andy, what are your thoughts on their proposal to raise their own salaries?
Well, quite frankly, it's obscene. It's absolutely obscene. I do not think they are not paid enough. They can always compare themselves to other counties, which they did. But I'm going to get in the weeds here just a little bit. So, I've been a county government watchdog for 34 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I usually typically read the budget book cover to cover. I've been to more meetings than all of the 5 county supervisors combined over that 34-year period. And so I know a lot about this subject matter. So normally what the county does when they're comparing themselves to other counties, they use what's called benchmark counties. And this is the description out of the county budget book from a couple of years ago when they put this information in there. The 8 benchmark counties are considered to have common characteristics, including but not limited to the following: total population of not more than 250,000 but less than 500,000, suburban to rural environments, and does not contain a large metropolitan city. So their normal benchmark counties are Sonoma County, Tulare, Monterey, Solano, Placer, Merced, San Luis, Santa Cruz, and Marin. But for the purpose of this raise, they had 2 or 3 of the benchmark counties in there, but the other ones were some of the 8 largest counties in the state, including Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, Alameda, Contra Costa. And so the one, like for instance, I'll take San Luis Obispo. It's the nearest one. So San Luis Obispo County supervisors make almost as much as Santa Barbara, right? And you could say, well, Santa Barbara is much larger. But Slow County supervisors have 1 aide. Okay? Santa Barbara County supervisors have up to 4. And so you can't compare those. And you certainly can't compare it to Los Angeles that has a population of 10 million people and a budget of $30 billion. And so when I asked, I said, I want the benchmark counties, apples to apples comparison in terms of how many staff members do they have, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was the first thing. The second thing is I do not consider this a full-time job. And the reason I say that is when we first started CoLab, Bill Wallace still kept his vet clinic open. Joni Gray still practiced law 2 days a week. Okay? And here's the killer. This is a statement unsolicited. We sent this thing out to all sorts of people. Brooks Firestone responded. Andy, as a retired supervisor, I'm opposed to the substantial raise proposed by the supervisors. This position is a part-time occupation that should be public service and not a lucrative career. And so they take off 4 weeks in the summer, 2 weeks at Christmas, a week at Thanksgiving, and every major holiday. That adds up to 4 months out of the year that they're not meeting at all. So I don't think they should be making $171,000 a year. And then the other dirty little detail is much of what they do, their core responsibility is their Tuesday Board of Supervisors meeting. They only meet 3 out of the 4 Tuesdays a month. They take 1 Tuesday off a month. That's where some of the other time off comes. But other than that, they may be on LAFCO, they're on Santa Barbara County Association of Governments, the APCD. APCD doesn't even meet every month anymore. But other than that, they have a couple of committee meetings they can send staff. But the bulk of what they do the rest of the week is a form of campaigning, electioneering, and rubbing elbows with people to remind them that they're their county supervisor. Like, for instance, last Saturday night, I went to the Santa Barbara County Cattlemen's annual dinner. Greg Hart was there. Greg Hart didn't have any work to do except to work the room, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what they do. And I know this because I've been intimately involved with a lot of these supervisors over the years. And so I just feel like, you know, Joni Gray practiced law 2 days a week. Brooks, you got the statement for Brooks, and also Mike Stoker concurred with that statement as well. The Brooks's statement that it's not a full-time job. I know one supervisor, even the weeks they were meeting, he never worked Fridays. He took a 3-day weekend every weekend. Mm-hmm. They answer to nobody. And, you know, I don't mind them getting 115 or even raising it. They get COLAs every year. If they want to raise it a little bit, fine. But what happens, they're comparing California to California. The rest of the country doesn't function this way. You could see some of the other people in other jurisdictions, they may make $12,000 or $15,000 a year for a similar position. But California always is ratcheting things up. And one of the reasons they're doing this, one of the reasons they jack these things up all of a sudden, is you've got this professional political class. They started the city council, then went board of supervisors, then went to assembly, then went to state senate. They got termed out, so then they went back. And they can't make it on a part-time, quote-unquote, part-time salary, so they pretend it's full-time. And I just think it's obscene and ridiculous.
Okay, you make a lot of really good points. Let me push back a little bit and ask you to respond to what I've heard from the supervisors, from people who support this. You know, there's a couple things. The first one is that, you know, they are really insulted that you are describing this as a part-time job, right? So obviously there's the weekend, there's the stuff they do to meet and greet, and it helps them in the future. But, you know, they show up at 9 o'clock, maybe earlier. They work all day. They go to events. They respond to constituents. You know, they say that this is a full-time job. And, you know, I'm a journalist. I've covered it. Not everybody works the same, of course, right? Some people do work a lot more hours than others. They can choose how much they're going to work, how much their staff's going to work. But, I mean, you can't really think that it's just a 20-hour-a-week job, right?
No, I think when they're working the board that week, maybe a 40-hour week, right? A board work. I'm not paying them to campaign. I'm not paying them to grip and grin and rub elbows with people. I'm paying them for that core job. But again, that's 3 weeks out of the month. And again, take off the 4 weeks of summer. Do you get 4 weeks off in the summer, 2 weeks at Christmas, a week at Thanksgiving, and 1 week out of the month?
I'm a journalist, so I don't get any of that.
Yeah, well, you know, I don't buy it. Hey, they can't fool me because I've been too intimately involved with this stuff. You know, Gail Marshall, her family, they owned a nursery, right? There's the other thing going on here, and this is the telltale sign. How many of these supervisors hired their campaign manager as their executive assistant?
Probably most of them, yeah.
Most of them. And that tells you something right there.
Yeah.
And again, I'm saying sometimes they work full-time, but having 1 8-hour or 10-hour day a week doesn't cut it. I work 8 to 10 hours every day, not 1 day a week, not 3 days a month. And that's it. 3 days a month, they have an intense schedule.
Right. So do you give them credit for, you know, they may not be in the meeting, but they are in an office. They are responding to constituents. They're meeting with constituents. They are going to events. They're talking with staff. I mean, you can't believe it's just 20 hours. Now you can
No, I
argue
didn't
it's not
say, I'd
40.
say it's 40 hours when they're working, but it ain't 40 hours when they're not working. Add up the months. So I know of two people, for instance,
Yeah.
on very, very important issues, tried to make an appointment with Laura Katz. They met with her aide. And I'm telling you, when you have four aides, they're doing the bulk of the constituent calls. They're answering the bulk of the complaints. And here's something else. This is the other thing that puts this whole argument into context. Upwards of 70% of the population of Santa Barbara County is in the city. Okay? So, for instance, Steve Lavagnino, I love Steve Lavagnino. I think he's a great supervisor. And he actually has the lowest number of staff, and he's always had the lowest number of staff of all 5 supervisors. He just has one full-time aide and another part-time, 1 or 2 other part-time people. So when Steve Lavagnino, up until this last redistricting, nearly the entirety of his district was city of Santa Maria. He gets a call for a pothole, he tells them to call the city. Barking dog, call the city. Noise complaints, problems with some development, it's call the city, call the city. So you've got Carpinteria, Santa Barbara, Goleta, Lompoc, Buellton, Solvang, Guadalupe, and Santa Maria. That's 70% of the population. The calls go to them.
Yeah.
So that's why, like I said, there's 40 city council people that share the duties of running this county.
Yeah.
It's not just them. They pretend they're the only ones. There's 40 city council members.
So another point that has been brought up is Santa Barbara's expensive, and you want somebody other than someone who's independently wealthy or already has some other job to be able to run for these positions. So you want somebody who's not a professional politician to say, sure, I want to serve. How much does it pay? Wow, $171,000. That's a good salary. So I'm going to run. And so what do you say to people who say, this is going to encourage qualified people to run because the salary is much better, and it's better than having a retired person or someone who's independently wealthy or someone who has another business. This can be their only job.
Because it's not a job, it's public service. They're not supposed to be doing this for a job or to get a good paying job. And this was one of the stupidest things I ever read in a staff report. They go, well, the human resources at the county said, we did a market survey in LA, the supervisors make X. Well, it's not like they can say, well, I'm going to quit the job here as supervisor. I'm going to go down in LA and become a supervisor. It doesn't work that way. What this job historically was people who had had a successful career doing XYZ did this toward the end of their life as public service. Or let's look at Roy Lee, okay? There's nobody that works harder than a restaurateur. Do you think the people that recruited him to run for supervisor told him he had to give up his restaurant?
No.
So you got one guy on there right now that's got to be working, I don't know anybody in restaurant business works less than 60, 70 hours, right?
Yeah.
And he's raising a family. It's not a full-time job. And I've recruited people to run for supervisor. I've told them this for 30 years. You have aides to take care of your constituents' calls. You're going to work every Tuesday for sure. And then one other day of the month, you're going to do either LAFCO and or SB CAG. But other than that, your aides can take care of a lot of the stuff you do. And you're going to have maybe 2 days a week where you're going to have to be somewhere. But your nights are free. It's up to you whether you go or send an aide. And I've been to too many meetings over the years where the aide got sent to the meeting.
Yeah. So would you be supportive of a gradual increase? I mean, $58,000 in 1 year. I mean, $58,000 is more than a lot of people make in a whole year.
Right.
And this is an increase of that amount. Would you be supportive of sort of a gradual increase over time, or what do you think of that?
Well, they're getting COLAs, they're
Yeah.
getting cost of living adjustments, and this is the thing that kills me as far they're tone deaf. So they want to take umbrage at the part time, right? We're taking umbrage at the 50. It's $56,000. We're taking umbrage at that. They want to take the focus off of that, but the focus is $56,000 raise.
Hmm.
This is a time where people in our region are buying their groceries with a credit card,
Mhm.
you know, and people are still working in poverty. We will have one of the highest poverty levels in the state. And again, you look at, well, the high cost of living we need. Well, why did Laura Capps run for this office twice? She knew what it paid. She campaigned. This is the oxymoron here, right?
Mhm.
They raise hundreds of thousands of dollars and work their butt off, walking precincts, raising money, going to fundraisers, get the job and go, this doesn't pay enough.
That is true. Now, what do you think about if voters were to decide, whether
I
this
wish that's what I asked. Put it to a vote. See how far that goes. They're already making more than most households make
right?
in the county, right? Already.
Yeah. So you don't think though. So what do you think's going to happen here? I mean, I will say that regardless of where you side on this, whether you believe they should make this or not, the way this is unrolled at administrative agenda was wrong. It's bad
Totally wrong.
messaging. It's there's no narrative there, and now they've lost control of it, and so they're going into the meeting next week with at a deficit because everyone's already angry at them, and they haven't even talked about it, in public. Um, is there a way out of this for them? Do you think they're just going to do it anyway and say sorry? I mean, they have that right, no matter how many people oppose.
Well, I don't know. I hope they don't, but here's the problem. I don't believe Hartman and Lavagnino are running again. And they could say, hey, I'm falling on this sword for the future board members, right? I'm falling on the sword. It's not for me, it's for them. And then Laura Capps has a pretty safe district, right? Those people aren't even paying attention to anything she do. The bulk of her district is UCSB. They'll be gone by the time anybody knows they used to get paid 115,000. So it could be a 3-2 vote on that. What they did back in 2014 is they had a citizens blue ribbon commission. And the supervisors literally picked their best friends to be on that commission to study their salaries back then. Now, back then, they were, I don't know how much they were maybe making $80,000 a year or something like that. And they ended up, there was too much heat, right? It was too much heat in the kitchen and they backed off. But they did start giving themselves regular colas versus having to vote every year, even for that, because they felt uncomfortable. But here's the killer, okay? This is the one thing. I'm not going to compare Laura Capps' chair to a judge who had to go to law school, have X number of years in the bar, and then get elected to a judge. I'm going to compare her to a U.S. senator.
Hmm.
Because she's the chair and will get an extra stipend, she will be making as much as a United States senator and a United States congressman. Now they talk about, well, she's the one that's came out most vociferously because people are sending me the emails. She goes, oh, we have to work X number of hours. We have a 1 point something billion budget. Well, what about a senator? They've got to fly back and forth to DC every week. They have to pay for their second residence, so do congressmen in DC, out of their own pocket. Yet people want to be a U.S. senator just like Laura Capps wanted to be a county supervisor. Why? Well, my opinion of her, she's using this as a holding place till Salute Carball retires. And she wants more money. Well, again, she knew how much the job paid when she got the job.
Yeah, there's definitely status involved with being a board of supervisor
Yeah,
member, and
yeah.
that's worth something, when you run. And so, you're going to make 115, and you're a board of supervisor, and that's worth something. So they're going to have Sable first on the Tuesday agenda, and then this is after that. And you know how these things work. Sometimes they try to wear the public out by putting a lot on agenda the same day. Do you think there'll be a fiery crowd of people by the time they get to the salaries, or is it going to be over because of all the Sable oil pipeline controversy?
Well, this is a huge problem. In the old days, they would put something like this, what they call time certain. So here, this is the way they run their meetings. It's horrific. And it used to not be this way. In the old days, they had a set morning agenda and a set afternoon agenda and a set lunch and closed session. So it ran like a clock, right? Well, now this is what they have. They're going to have their admin calendar, general public comment, Sable that could last for 2 hours. So that could bring them to 11 or 12 o'clock easily, right?
Yeah.
We do not know if they're breaking for lunch. We do know they're going to break for closed session. We will not know until Tuesday around 12 o'clock after Sable's done when the next item will be heard. Sometimes they go all the way through. So I cannot tell people when to show up. I would have to tell people to spend your whole gosh dang day watching the hearing to know when to do comment over Zoom or when to show up. And I believe that's by design. I believe they put it last on the agenda so nobody knows. And truthfully, I've been at this for a long time. This thing could be heard at 2 or 3 in the afternoon, or it could be heard at 1, or it could be heard at 12:30. Nobody knows.
Right. Yeah. Well, I cover government, and that happens in
Yes.
the city of Santa Barbara quite a bit. It's just, long days, and, there's 100 people in the room when the meeting starts. By the time they get the
Exactly.
agenda, there's 8, so they
Plus,
just,
they're having this in Santa Barbara, where a lot of people don't follow the county government as much as they do in the North County. And that has to do with rural versus urban. A lot of the people up here, like Orchid, is the largest, other than IV, and I think it's bigger than IV. It's the largest unincorporated area that people are mostly affected by this, plus the farmers and the ranchers, right? And again, they're having this meeting in Santa Barbara. Like I said, I believe the whole thing is designed to limit public comment. That's why we've been asking people to email or phone call the supervisors.
yeah. I've heard there's been some harsh language directed at the board members. This debate should be kept professional, right?
Right.
It should not be targeting individuals personally. What do you want to say anything to people
Well,
who?
we just told them to oppose the raise. We didn't put language in it. We did not send out a form or anything. But that tells you how mad people are. This was the most insulting thing about it all. People are dying out here because of inflation. Small business owners, households, they're dying. And one of the arguments of the board, well, we want to keep our wages up with inflation. And this is this is my biggest criticism of this board. Supervisors are elected to represent the public in the halls of government. They're supposed to be the citizen representatives that have oversight of the government. The county has this wicked little phrase called we're the county family. We're the county family. The people paying all their wages are not part of the family, right? And now the supervisors are treating themselves as staff by doing job market surveys for an elected official. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so to me, for them to just treat themselves like, hey, we're in a different class than the people out there in the public. We're going to raise our salaries because of inflation. Too bad you can't do that too.
Yeah, I'd agree. It looks really bad to do it in this large amount of just one time at a time when no one else really can get that kind of a pay increase. And in fact, inflation's so high, they're actually losing money every year.
Right.
So Andy, appreciate that conversation. I want to talk to you about just a couple quick things before you got to go. I know you're busy. This AMR, Santa Barbara County firefighter controversy that has happened. It's at the end here. Recently, there was a settlement, and then there was announcement that AMR, the pay increases were the cost was gonna increase by 35%. This is a long history. We know the Board of Supervisors wanted to award the contract to County Fire. The recommendation was AMR. They figured out a way to not choose AMR and go with County Fire. There was a lawsuit, then a settlement. They ended up having to choose AMR. I guess this ties into what you're saying in terms of, sometimes the board does these things that are sort of out of touch with what the public wants. But can you talk a little bit about this situation and how it was handled and this 35% AMR increase, which I would imagine is like goes to their point, was like, this is more expensive than it was supposed to be.
Okay, first of all, this was the dirtiest deal I've seen in 34 years. This was the only time I could honestly say the board was being dishonest. It's one thing to have political differences of opinion, differences of priority. This was a dirty deal. So they set this thing up right at first. They set it up right. They had an independent commission of experts from across the country review the bids between County Fire and AMR won the bid. They won it fair and square. There was a notice to award the contract. The county canceled it. Then they pretended they were going to have a two-provider system, but in the end, like you said, they knocked off AMR. They got hit with the 76-page injunction. The judge called them on their lies, right? I mean, they just flat out lied in the public record. And so they lost. They couldn't win the lawsuit. And they knew they couldn't win the lawsuit, so they ended up giving AMR a contract. So yes, it went up. But what you don't know is, so County Fire has had IV, I think Vandenberg Village in Cuyama, their rates went up the same. That was in the contract. So they're paying, part of that 35% is increased first responder fees. So what happens is the system, they know there's more fire stations closer, scattered throughout the community. They know plus the fire guys get the call first. Now in the new system, maybe they'll get it at the same time. They pay fire to get there first. They pay all fire agencies in the county get paid when they get there first and help stabilize the person. So part of that money is for it's an increased amount for first responders. Secondly, County Fire wanted their own dispatch center. Part of that is to pay for the dispatch center. Third, they also pay for the County Emergency Service Agency. And so the fact is when fire is the ambulance provider, they're getting paid the same thing. So as part of the contract, the county wanted extra stuff in the contract. And then plus they had gotten contracts for something like 20-year renewals, or renewal every couple of years, renew. This brought them up to current rates because it was a new contract. But the other thing too is most people don't pay the rate, right? In fact, County Fire gets paid more on a Medicare call than AMR gets. And so the people without insurance or crummy insurance, they ain't going to pay that 35% increase. And that's one of the reasons and this is true of all medical programs, right? You and I, if we have insurance, we're paying for the people without insurance. So it's jacked up in that regard, but it's the contract. The county determined the parameters of the contract, not AMR.
Now, what is your reasoning? Why do you think you call it the dirtiest deal? What was their incentive to just figure out a way to give the contract to the county firefighters? What's the real reason in your mind?
Well, number one, they bought 30 ambulances without going to the board. I've never seen that before. Yeah. Everybody signed off. I got all the paperwork. Everybody signed off on that purchase except the Board of Supervisors. And when you spend a couple $1 million, that has to be on the admin calendar at a minimum. It was never on there. So they secretly bought them, stored them at Vandenberg because they were assured they were going to get this contract come hook or crook. And they did get it for, on paper anyway. And just the fact that I think they wanted it because they're the county and they think they could do everything better. And the rationale for community choice energy and the ambulance contract going to county fire is there's this phrase that we're going to eliminate the profit motive. Whatever went to Southern California or PG&E on 3CE, and whatever profit goes to AMR, we're going to take that profit and plug it back into the system. But you know the one question they ignored, and let me say this is people don't know this. County Fire Union was on my board for years, including when this contract let out. I had no dog in this fight. AMR was a negligible on again, off again member of COLAB. I stayed out of it until they started cheating on the contract. They cheated. And, you know, the bottom line here is that the one thing they never do figure out is AMR costs X number of dollars per ambulance ride. Fire would say, well, we're cheaper, we're wide, but they don't put their pension costs in there. With AMR's fire, their paramedics are members of a union, but AMR pays for their union costs. They never put sheriff and fire are the two largest pension costs for county government. And they never figured in the pension cost when they're discussing the AMR profit.
All right. Well, that's a done deal, and you know that was remarkable to see that play out in terms of the injunction and the order, and then the settlement, and it was all different than what was originally envisioned there. And I know all the county fire officials are very upset, and they believe they can do the job, you know, better. There's a lot of bad blood and hurt feelings over this whole thing. I want to ask you, Andy, about before we go, the Board of Supervisors and Roy Lee. So we had a huge political upset last year. Somehow, I mean, I'm sure you thought Doss Williams would be in office forever too. Roy Lee pulled off this upset and remarkable, right? I mean, when I found out he was running, I'm like, okay, that's great. There's no chance, zero chance, you know. And I think most people felt that way. What's your take on Roy? He's only been in office a short amount of time, but do you like where he's headed? Do you like his approach, his attitude? He is a Democrat. You are Republican. However, Roy's considered like a listens to everybody kind of guy, right? So, do you have high expectations for Roy Lee?
Well, I'll tell you something. I literally hated Doss before he became a supervisor, and I actually learned to like the guy. Now, and one of the reasons I liked him is he used to say this from the dais, I'm an environmentalist that's not going to just always say no, right? So I learned to respect him. Now, was he a hardcore lefty? Yes. But I learned to respect him that he at least tried to listen to people. But Roy Lee, the one thing I believe and I hope and pray that Roy Lee's got going for him is a small business owner. And small business owners know better than anybody else the cost and the inefficiency of county government. For instance, on March 11th, they're going to jack up their fees for restaurant inspections and pool inspections and hazardous material inspections because the county has this thing called 100% cost recovery, where if somebody pays a fee, they want them to pay for the entire cost of the department and all overhead in the county that's charged to that department. So that means the county has no skin in the game to keep down costs, right? And their fees are ridiculous. You know, planning and development fees. You know, people don't know this. If you try to build a 7-Eleven in the South County in the unincorporated area, the traffic fee alone is $1 million. $1 million. So that's why, and they get their money from property taxes from development, and yet they screw them by charging fees. Plus this process, you never know if you're going to get out of it alive. And this whole 100% cost recovery is their selfish way of saying, we're going to charge the public as much as we can get away with. I'm hoping that as a business owner, he's going to say, you know what, this ain't working for us.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how that plays out. You know, you've got a couple of conservative members, Bob Nelson, Steve Lavagnino. Steve seems less conservative in his old age. Can you give an assessment of those two? Are you comfortable with how they've been representing their constituents on the Board of Supervisors?
They vote right almost all the time.
Mhm.
My problem is I don't feel like they take the battle, so to speak, to the South County supervisors. Steve did on, and this was one of his remarkable things. He did take the battle where Guadalupe didn't qualify in anybody's book to have a levee to protect itself from the Santa Maria River. Poor community, talk about social justice and environmental justice. He went to bat. He went to bat for them, and that was great. But for the most part, I don't see him taking the battle to the board. In other words, I wish they were more aggressive. So they vote right almost all the time, but they don't agendize stuff that I would like to see agendized, and or make the case for things that will help people that are struggling right now.
Yeah. And then last thing, it's interesting that, you learn to like Doss. Because he kind of got less popular with his base over the years, right? So the people who liked him at the beginning did not like him at the end, and then you've got you who didn't like him and started to like him. Just last thing, a lot have been said, but why did he lose in your mind? Was it Mike Stoker? Was it the behind the scenes Republican support of Roy Lee? Did Doss just not want it anymore? What's your reasoning?
I believe Laura Capps and the Montecito Journal publisher tag team to work against him for Democrats. I think Stoker helped him a little bit about Republicans, but I think the Montecito debris net hurt him. The cannabis stink hurt him. And then plus the gal that normally ran his campaigns for some reason didn't run this campaign.
Yeah.
And so I think and then Doss and Nick Welsh, who, by the way, never covered ambulances and has not covered the 48% raise for some reason. I think there's a missing poodle in the South County. So we might want to go to the pound and see if we can find it. Anyway, he said this, and it's brilliant. Nick's brilliant. Because he had the ability to be brash and humble at the same time.
Yeah.
He was a know-it-all. The guy's too smart for his own britches, right? So you really couldn't tell him anything. You couldn't talk him out of anything. Not that I ever tried, because I'm not in the inner circle. But I don't think he knew so much he didn't listen very well.
Yeah, it's good. Well put. Okay. Andy Caldwell, thanks so much for your time. I didn't even introduce you, Executive Director of CoLab, right? I forgot about that. But, regardless of what people think of you and what a majority of my audience thinks of you, there's no doubt that, you make county government better by raising these issues and holding them accountable. Because had you not spoke on that supervisor thing, right? Maybe we would have seen it. Maybe we wouldn't have, the journalists, but we saw it. And,
Last minute. Can I say one more thing? I want
yeah,
to come back and talk about something.
sure.
The biggest, costliest boondoggle in the history of the county is the trash digester, anaerobic digester compost facility at Tehiquas. With interest, this is a $250 million project. The reason people aren't screaming bloody murder about it is technically the ratepayers are paying for it versus the county. It still doesn't work. And they're getting the bejesus suit out of them from the first operator who they fired because he said the reason it wasn't working was their fault. On Tuesday's agenda, they got a $4.5 million maintenance contract because they can't get it to work. And I don't know, I tried calling 4 different people in the county today. Nobody would answer their phone. They were at one time trucking the compost down to Ventura County because it's unusable.
Oh, wow.
So I'd love to talk to you about that or get somebody on the county to explain it, but it's the biggest financial boondoggle in the history of the county.
All right. Well, we'll have you back on the show and talk about some more issues.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right. Have a great day. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.